All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with our final Digging Deeper of 2022. We are going to be taking December off. Our media team, which Michael Austin here is a part of, has a lot to do in December. So this is our final episode. And I'm going to go ahead and say this is a once-in-a-generation episode.
I see what you did there.
Corny joke. If you're with us still, we're going to be talking about Gen Z. If you are older, I'd say anywhere from about 50 to 70. Those Gen Zs in your life are probably your grandkids, right? Yeah, grandkids. And
Kids, yeah.
being that I was in youth ministry forever, my man Joe here is our high school director. This is a really important topic. And then our resident Gen Z, Michael Austin, is here. The Michael Austin. So yeah, we're gonna be talking about Gen Z, and there's a lot to get into, right? We want to talk about what is it, why is it important, what are Gen Zs, what's the relationship with the church. We want to hit all of these questions, but I do want to do a little Generation 101. I looked up, and you're the big Gen Z kind of as far as the
I
the
love
book
studying
knowledge.
generations in general, but
that's
specifically Gen Z,
Yeah. So I'm just going to go over real quick, starting from 1900, really quickly, just the list of generations, because it's nothing I really knew much about until people were criticizing me for being a millennial. Then I was like, oh, I should look and see what this is. And if you guys have heard anything different, because these names, some of them are like locked in, some of them there's different names. 1901, 1924, the greatest generation.
Greatest generation.
Right? They endured they were born through the Great Depression.
Wow.
Right? Yeah.
Well, before the Great Depression, Great Depression was 29. So
okay. I'm sorry. I was thinking 19, but
like World War I.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Wartime generation.
Wow.
Then the next 20 years, 25 to 45, the silent generation. And maybe a few members of that generation, or a handful still alive.
Moving into World War II.
Then getting into as we become familiar with generations, the baby boomer generation, 46 to 64. My parents fall into those categories as well.
Lots of babies born after World War II.
Lots
That's why
of
it's
babies
called
born.
baby boomer.
Booming.
Yep. Okay, Gen X, 65 to 79. I got a sibling in that generation.
Gen
A
X.
lot of our staff here, Gen X,
Yeah, Gen X. Millennials, woo woo.
There
Joe,
it
that's
is.
me and
Hello.
you.
There
it
Yeah,
is.
we're there. Gen Z, my guy Michael Austin here. And then
Hey.
there is a new generation that is
The
already
upcoming
among
one,
us
yeah.
that we're seeing in our middle school.
Well, they'd be younger than middle school. I'd say that they're like elementary age and
elementary,
younger now.
And that is Gen Alpha.
For now.
Alpha?
For now, they're called Alpha.
Yeah.
Ultra
But there's
X would be
already
better.
some new names coming out. There might be Generation Becoming, Generation.
Yo.
They're not really. They usually don't label a generation until they get to more adolescent stage, because then they can track why they're called that generation. So, wartime generations, or maybe some financial insecurity generations coming up. So there might be some things they might relabel it. But Gen Alpha for now.
Wow.
For now, yeah. But so here we are. We are talking about those ages 15 to 27. That is generally the Gen Z.
Gen Z.
So one day Joe walks in my office. We're talking Digging Deeper. I asked him if he wants to be on one. He said, hey, I can't. But whenever you want to talk about Gen Z,
That's
let me
right.
know. So I want to know. Here we are. It
happened,
I made sure
finally.
to make it happen. Why, Joe? Why is it so important for our listeners to hear 45 minutes about people that are age 15 to 27 right now?
Right. Well, I think sometimes Gen Z can. I won't say sometimes. I think a lot of times Gen Z can be misinterpreted, or people can get the wrong impression, like, oh, those stinking punk kids, right? And I think that's not necessarily older people. That could just be any of us. We can kind of get maybe frustrated or confused, like, why do the young people do it that way? Why are they so into their phones? Why are they so into being more social justice minded? Why are they so into this or that? And it can be frustrating, I think, for folks. And I get questions quite often, Joe, how do I deal with my grandkid who's acting out in this way? And because they don't quite understand maybe the difference of generational differences. And so I thought it would be cool for us as a church, for us as a podcast, to take some time to say, here's what Gen Z is from our perspective, from the research we've done, the things we're seeing in youth ministry. Mike Lawson brings like a pretty awesome perspective of being a Gen Zer. I thought that'd be cool for the audience to hear straight from the horse's mouth. Here's kind of maybe why these things happen, or why we're seeing things the way they are. And I think I'm jacked about it. I give my life to Gen Z, so that's part of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's super good. So a lot of different directions we can go. Now, and you kind of obviously we don't want to just talk about the generation. We want to talk about its connection to the church.
Yep.
Why it's so important. And I think the quick answer it's the future of the church, right? Like we're not going to be here forever.
Sure.
And that's just obviously the drum and youth ministry that we want to hit so hard. And I know you and Eric and Dan are so passionate about building into our youth, but building our youth into our church, right? So if you attend River Valley downtown, there's a good chance you're starting to see our youth at the doors more, greeting, being more of a part. I know that 1030's been getting pretty pumped with the youth over in that section, so it's super important. But sorry.
It's all you, baby.
So one question I did not ask you guys ahead of time, just thought of it as you were talking. I promise I'm listening to you.
Love these impromptu questions.
Biggest, and maybe we save this for later on. I don't know. Biggest misunderstandings of Gen Z. So you kind of said
Let's
those
go there.
punk kids, which is a phrase I hear from you all the time. More so in a reference. Yeah. How are the Gen Zers misunderstood?
Let's go to Mike Lawson. What do you think?
I feel like Gen Z definitely gets the worst reputation and has the worst stereotypes. But I think out of every generation, Gen Z definitely has the greatest longing to belong and has the greatest identity crisis out of any generation. I think that's true for all generations, but especially with social media and just the state of the world, I feel like no one knows who they are. And so, especially when you don't have Jesus in the mix, like, where do you find your identity? And so I think that's one of the greatest misconceptions is worst reputation, but no identity. And so...
It's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you guys think feeds into that worst reputation? Like when I think of it, if I'm looking at negative qualities or trying to come up with them in a very isolated way, I'm thinking like phone is king kind of stuff, right? Like they are always on their phone. I think this person would be under what was Gen Z. I remember I worked in a youth program, and one of the kids lost their cell phone, and you would have thought the end of the world was happening. But it was just that like connection to the cell phone, and that can be. Now that's not just Gen Zers, but there is that being raised. I mean, they've had a phone in their hands for probably like right out of the after being born, right? Like,
well, they were raised with it. Yeah, Gen Z is the first generation to have the internet their entire life. They're the only generation alive right now that had the internet their entire life. Wow. So internet came in around 95. It got commercialized. Yeah. So they were raised with technology, internet. That's a unique factor for Gen Z. And that then leads to a lot of like a misunderstanding and like a probably a disproportionate like negative side talk towards Gen Z is because like they were raised with such different cultural norms. There was just so many things that are so different. Like they don't rewind movies; they just pick the next movie, right? There's just so many things that come with technological advances that other generations can't empathize quite with. So there's a lot to that though.
Yeah, I think also this generation is built upon instant gratification more than any other generation in the sense of like, I go on Instagram, I post a photo, I get likes, I feel good. I feel sad, I look up a YouTube video, I feel happy. And so I think that then inspires, not for all Gen Z, but I think there's a lack of work ethic and also like, it's just so based around instant gratification rather than delayed gratification for something greater.
That's a great point.
And so,
yeah. So right after this, I want to get on to like more traits and qualities that define Gen Z. But while we're still bagging on them, so to your point, I did hear something. Oh, it's this term, something quitting. Is it not
quiet quitting?
Quiet quitting. And now, is that a Gen Z specific thing?
I think it's just a workplace thing in general right now after the COVID pandemic stuff. Yeah.
And if you're unfamiliar with it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's this term where you are going to do the least amount of work as possible, and almost kind of either force their hand to fire you or just get away with. And I was like, I didn't realize what I do has a term, but I guess it does. No, I'm just kidding.
He's a hard worker. Audience, don't listen to him.
Just kidding. But yeah, so I found that fascinating. That's interesting for you to verbalize that. The Instagram, like the likes thing you said, is pretty fascinating because that's just not a notion that I can really like associate with. Like, I just don't have the mental capacity to like keep track of that. But I've seen that it's like a real thing. Like, man, 100%. This photo only has X amount of likes. That's a bummer. I was like, that's triple the amount of people I have on my Instagram.
Right,
So,
right.
Yeah.
but again, that sense of belonging, which it's really interesting. Yeah, and it'd be really interesting to even dive into. I don't know if that's something we do here, but like you kind of see certain generations acting a certain way in response to their parents, right?
Right.
Essentially, the generation before them.
Right.
Like I heard something about like millennials are generally helicopter parents, right? Like our generation are maybe going to be the people going to the nursery, checking out the children's ministry, making sure everything's good, just right there.
Sure.
But it's almost like, oh, I heard it put in a way I forget, but like it's a response to how they were raised, maybe with a little bit more like, hey, it's summer, go out the door 8 a.m., you come back at dinner.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know if you have.
Sometimes there's like the generations flip flop what's important or what they value or what they think is cool or acceptable.
It might be a response to the previous
Right.
generation not thinking something was
Yeah.
important. But yeah. So all right, let's actually kind of lay down a groundwork, and then some of the really interesting questions of the spirituality is involved with Gen Z. But first, what are some across the board? And Joe, this is where we're going to go to all your book knowledge. Characteristic traits, qualities represented by Gen Z.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of great information out there. You can Google. I mean, we'll get to resources
Which I
later.
did.
You Google, yeah, a lot of great books too. A lot of great faith-based books too, and podcasts now. That I would, if you're a parent or grandparent and you want to understand more of some of these things, I would definitely encourage you to go deeper with books, podcasts. Barna Research Group does a lot, but a lot of things that I associate with Gen Z, and real quick, is they're information overloaded. They have access to information. Every ounce of information pretty much ever put in print is on the internet, and therefore Gen Z knows how to get to that information faster than I can even think about it.
Yeah.
And so they're information overloaded. There's a lot of other things that go into spirituality. I think there are a lot of irreligious. Rise of the nuns is kind of the term we hear a lot. There's a lot of young people who would say, I don't affiliate with religion anymore. They won't say they're atheists. They just say, I don't do anything.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of something we see a lot too. But also, go ahead.
So sorry, caught me in the coffee. So why would you say that is? And I have a theory.
Why there's
obviously-
they're more irreligious?
why maybe they are irreligious? And I'm wondering, we have an expressive generation who wants to just completely roam free.
Sure.
And religion often is tied with restrictions and limits. Do you think they're making that connection?
That could be some of it. When you meet one Gen Zer, you've met one Gen Zer.
Right.
You can't really
Yeah.
say it's for
Yeah.
everybody. But I think a lot of it goes back to the information part. When you now have access to reading about the New Age mysticism, when you can read about Hinduism, when you can read about religions in the bush of Africa, you can access all the information. And without any guidance or interpretation of that stuff, as a Gen Zer, you can look at that and go like, wait, the claim of Jesus saying he's the only way, that doesn't make sense to what I'm reading and seeing on
Right.
my favorite YouTube channels or my favorite Instagram account. They would not agree with that. They would say like
Right.
all roads should lead to positivity or life or a heaven or a nebulous place. So I think there's just so much out there, and how do they navigate that? I call it artificial maturity. There's like we've given them all the access to the information of the world, but they don't know how to navigate. There's no wisdom in it. There's information, but there's no
Yeah.
wisdom. And so those are just a couple things I see real quick off the top of my head for things that I would say define Gen Z. There's a lot more we could go into, but I don't know, Michael Austin, what do you think? Things that you see defining your generation?
Oh my goodness. I think to your point about just why some Gen Zers would, number one, there's so much information and access at our fingertips, but I think there's a lack of knowledge how to discern it.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much. And also, like, what's interesting is most of my closest friends and circle that I run around are pastors' kids, but they don't follow Jesus anymore.
Interesting.
And what's crazy is the majority of the reason for most of them is they've been so burned by the religiosity. I don't know if that's a word, but
It's a book
But-
too, I'm pretty sure. Right?
yeah, let's go. But of Christianity. And as a group of people, as Christians who are supposed to be the most loving community, we can often be the most hateful, which is super disappointing. And so and I don't know if this is necessarily a generational thing because I know so many boomers who are the most
Sure.
loving Christians I've ever known, and so many millennials that are the most hateful, and same for
Yeah.
Gen Z, and
Yeah,
it's across
yeah.
the board. But I know one thing, and I think this can also go to the point of wanting to belong somewhere and wanting to feel accepted. One of the reasons I have tattoos and dress the way I do and look the way I do is because I want people to feel accepted and loved no matter how they want to express themselves, no matter how they feel, no matter how they want to look. And I think the religious part of Christianity can sometimes really tear that down in a really negative light and fashion. And so I think it's a huge reason why a lot of my friends have stepped away is because they've just found nothing but hateful just language and hateful just non-acceptance in the
Sure.
Christian community, and so that's why I'm trying to be the one that's like, no, Jesus says come as you are, and you
Yeah.
are loved and you are accepted, and he wants you to be here, and so I don't know if that just answered your question or
No,
not,
that's
but
good. So
but
good.
yeah,
No, Gen Z is so independent as well. Like you're saying,
Yeah.
like there's this. I wouldn't say I've ever met a Gen Zer who says I know better than you, Joe. No one's ever said. No, I've never had a Gen Zer say that to me.
Yeah.
But they're always one step ahead of me. It feels like too. Like they already have Googled, or they've already researched, or they've already TikToked, or they've already done whatever on the topic that I may be presenting or the thought that I'm thinking. And so it is interesting to hear there's a desire for authentic Christianity.
Yeah,
Orthodox
absolutely.
Christianity is like there's a hunger for it. Actually, in fact, we're seeing some, I would say, mini revivals. I mean, I don't say that lightly. I'm hearing reports of things like in Nashville, overseas, of like mini revivals happening at raves, where an authentic Jesus is preached and proclaimed. The follow Jesus, come as you are, like what you're saying, Mike
Yeah.
Austin, and kids are responding, like hundreds of kids at a time responding. And not just like, oh yeah, I want to like do the cool thing like back in like the Choir of the Fire days, like millennials went to. This is like authentic, like Jesus showing up in a place where Gen Z is at, and like it's pretty exciting to hear. There is a hunger, I think, for like honest, real Jesus and truth. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a hunger for truth and for love, right? Like,
Yeah.
regardless of who you are, if you're hit with like true, authentic love, you're
Yeah.
going to recognize it.
Absolutely.
And if you're hit with authentic truth, you're going to recognize it.
Yeah.
And so, all religion aside, I think if you are presented with that, it's going to linger in your head, and I think that's what can draw kids. And then what the second step is those older generations, the millennials, older generations, right? The
Yeah,
older
sure.
people showing that as well, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's really cool to see that happen. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like if all our generations had Madden ratings, right? Like 0 to 99.
Madden ratings?
Madden,
Yeah,
Madden
yeah,
ratings. Yeah, you get me. Like,
Yeah.
right?
I know
Like-
what you mean, but like the audience might not know what you mean. And
Oh,
Madden rating?
so Madden football. It's one of the most popular football games on any game console, and you'd have a player. So like your most popular players in the NFL,
Tom Brady.
Tom Brady as a quarterback. Like he'd have certain. Like his arm strength would be at like a 76 because he's or maybe an 80 because he's okay, but he's one of the smartest quarterbacks. So his like cognitive abilities would be at 99, and 99
Yeah.
is the highest rating
Yeah.
for a Madden rating possible.
So you're gonna Madden rating the generations? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I was gonna say, what if so? Like your fastest players would have a Madden speed of 99.
Oh, I see.
So I would say like the older generations, like our parents
Sure.
and grandparents, like discipline, right? Madden rating is probably
Sure.
through the roof. Your work ethic, your
Yeah.
routine, is like a 99, right? Where I don't know if for us younger, even the millennials and Gen Zs,
Right.
And that's kind of that seems to be the other side of the coin, where we have just a dearth of knowledge. I don't know if I'm using that term correctly.
Whoa.
Our access to everything, but as you said, we don't know how to handle it, right? Or
Yeah.
specifically,
Sure.
Gen Zs don't know how to handle it. The discipline's not there,
Right.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think that's what creates that void of like, man, like you really were on your phone for 12 hours. Like, what were you doing? And I don't know, right? Like that's the response. Like,
sure.
I don't want to engage in this conversation, so I'm just going to say I don't know, and I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're seeing that like, yeah, maybe not a huge lack of discipline, or not a huge discipline in maybe the younger generations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a huge thirst for just as a super broad statement, just genuine things, like, because in light of what you said, like, so much of our days are just fed by 12 hours of TikTok, like, every single day, and Instagram and whatever. And so, like, I think just there's such a thirst for just anything that's genuine. And
So
so,
authenticity and yeah, it's so fascinating. When I worked in the youth program, hey, what do you want to do? I don't know. All right, well, let's do something. All right, well, I'm bored. Well, what do you want to do? I don't know. Like, that was really hard.
Yeah.
But then it was cool because when you actually gave them, like, some of the best time was when I was like, okay, I'm not going to be a program director. I'm going to be Tim, right? And you give them a little bit of
Yeah.
authenticity. You actually see them open up a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit. But
Yeah, we see like a lot of drive in Gen Z, like a lot of gumption almost. There's a lot of like the entrepreneurial spirit is in
Yeah.
Gen Z. Like, oh, I'm gonna go do this thing. I have big dreams, big hopes. The statistics would say Gen Z is one of the most driven generations in the history of the world. Now that some of those numbers may be pre-pandemic, but what's really interesting is they may be the most like driven generation that we've ever seen, but they're also the most depressed generation we've ever seen.
yeah.
And so there's this where 60, I think it's like 67 or 68% of Gen Z would say, like, I have a positive like drive. I'm like gonna like go do something new or cool in the next 10 years of my life. Like they have a really positive like drive. But then like those same 60%, almost to the T statistically, would say that the future is bleak. So they have a personal drive, like they see that they can do a lot, but they don't trust what's going on around them. They see the things in the world, political divisions. They see they have access to the news and stuff that like millennials, I didn't know what was happening in like Russia and Ukraine when I was in middle school. But these kids now like can see headlines of Russia and Ukraine war every hour or every minute.
Yeah.
And like it's overwhelming for them. So there's a very bleak outlook for them. But yet individually they like want to do a lot for the world. It's a really interesting contrast they have.
Well, yeah, even you think of like national disasters. So I was in 7th grade, 9/11. You were,
6th grade.
Yeah, 6th grade, and how we had to wait all day to watch that unfold. Right.
Right.
In the morning, you think it could have been an accident. Oh, you're hearing at lunch, maybe it was this. We get home, sit down at the dinner table with our moms. Well, now something happens in Ukraine, and we know
live
about it in
streamed,
30
yeah.
seconds. Yeah,
Right.
we know about it before the news does. Which again, that's overwhelming when you think of like
Oh, man.
receiving all of that information.
Yeah.
I was Rach, Claire, and I, we drove down to Folsom, and we went to a Niners game this weekend. And I got Google Maps, right, and it's telling me where to go. And I was like thinking back when I was a baby, my family went to Wyoming, and so that's 30 years ago. And I'm like, wait, are you telling me my dad had to bust out Oregon road maps, Montana, like Wyoming or whatever states are in
Yeah.
between, and he had to actually
crazy.
sit there and map out because
Yeah.
he couldn't even print up MapQuest on the computer.
Right.
'Cause
The internet
it
wasn't quite even born yet. Yeah.
Right. And I will say a little side note, like that's one of the really fun things to do with people in different generations. Like I've sat down with my sister-in-law, who's a Gen Z, and her friend, and talk about how the internet has changed, like dial-up internet, right?
Yeah.
That's just so fascinating. It's just things you don't think about where they're like, wait, why are you making that dial tone? What was that? Like just
Yeah,
things
right,
that are
right,
so.
right.
And so for you guys, maybe as you're writing down notes how to interact with other generations, just like comparing some of those things that are like have evolved.
Yeah.
It's just such it opens your eyes to be like, oh, like our experiences are different. Real quick, before we dive into more of the again like Gen Z's relationship to the church, what does our church do for Gen Z? What does Gen Z do for the church? I do want to go over. Some fun facts like as we get to know Gen Z.
Sure.
And if you guys have comments about it, we'll talk about it, and then we'll move on. But yeah, just some interesting things about Gen Z here, real quick. All right, so just a few of these. One I found fascinating. Gen Z represents the most racially and ethnically diverse generation in the U.S. Right?
So
you hear that
cool.
and move on, but you actually
Right.
followed up with
Right. So this is the first generation in U.S. history to not have a majority white generation. So 49% or less are white. Race.
so cool, yeah.
And so its majority are Black, Hispanic, Asia Pacific. All of it. Yeah. So very interesting to see the diversity in Gen Z, at least in the U.S. context. Just it's really cool. I think it's exciting.
Yeah.
It's going to be really cool to see them grow up and see what the next generation holds as well.
Yeah. Gen Z has a voice and is comfortable expressing their opinions. I think we've definitely seen that, and tied in with another thing about how Gen Zs are very justice-minded or social justice-minded.
Yeah.
I think the last few years, from all sides, for better or worse, we've seen those things into play with Gen Z. Again, more so pointing out qualities, whether they're strengths or
it's
weaknesses,
great.
is how they use it. But one I wanted to talk about, because I've found this fascinating, and I would almost think that maybe this could be something in the millennial generation as well, but they're not the ones we're talking about. Gen Z brings conversation of mental health to the forefront. So I've actually noticed that if you follow sports, there have been a few athletes. I think of Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, and there was a football player. It wasn't Calvin Ridley, was it? It was.
Calvin Ridley had other problems.
But then he had other problems. But we're seeing professional athletes at the highest stage withdraw from the French Open, and Naomi Osaka got a lot of crud for that. I don't know if it was the French Open. Simone Biles, the Olympic stage, takes a step back because she just was not feeling mentally and emotionally steady to do that. Got so much flack for that. And then I believe there was a football player as well who, big stages, and they're stepping back for their mental health, bringing up the conversation. Joe, you mentioned maybe you have a few thoughts about that.
Yeah, Gen Z is sadly it's in a mental health crisis. The CDC in December said there's a crisis amongst our youth. I quickly copied and pasted a part of the report, and just one stat they had was that they said from 2009 to 2019, so pre-pandemic, the share of high schoolers who reported persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness increased by 40%. In 10 years, increased 40% to more than 1 in 3 students. So at least, and I would say this number is even higher post-pandemic from my experience, at least here in the Rogue Valley. More than 1 in 3 students feels lonely. And in fact, I asked high school students this week, I was at a high school campus this week for lunch, and I said to the students I was with, I said, how many of you felt lonely this week? And I would say 75% of the kids I was sitting with, just kind of put their hand I felt lonely. And we went there for a little while in the discussion. But now feeling lonely is one thing, but the rise in statistics would prove this. The rise in depression, anxiety, suicide rates, self-injury has spiked since 2008. Spiked. And it's a national crisis emergency now. And so we got to take it seriously as a church, as youth workers, as a public, as people who love others the way Jesus loved us. We need to pay attention to the mental health of all generations. But I would say be careful and watch out and love on especially our Gen Z siblings and brothers and sisters. But Michael Austin, what has been your experience with mental health with your friend group or with what you've seen kind of in your peers? Would you say it's something you guys talk about a lot, or is it something that's we don't go there as much as maybe I'd like?
Oh goodness. Well, as someone who struggles with mental health,
Sure.
some serious for sure. I think something good about Gen Z is it is spoken about a lot, and I think that needs to be encouraged more and more because as someone who I know tons of people from each generation, I feel like as far as mental health goes, boomers were kind of we don't talk about it, we keep it inside, just let it ride.
Yeah, deal with it.
Yeah,
right?
deal with it in silence. Millennials came a little bit more out on the forefront, and then now Gen Z is just it's all out there. It's all out there, and it almost can be trendy to talk about it now, to be honest.
Sure.
But and some of it's for attention, some of it's not. But for sure. In my friend group and many friend group, it's really tough. But we're all going through stuff, whether it be death of a parent, different types of abuse. So many real factors that I feel like just have not been talked about until now. And so, and just even with the pandemic, especially the lonely feeling, I am so incredibly blessed to have an amazing support system around me with my dad, Michael Bond, worship pastor.
Name dropping.
Love to
okay.
see it, but so many people
Sure.
don't have that,
Yeah.
and it's just them against the world, And so having to deal with that built upon social media, dude, everything is fake, man.
Sure.
I can be here in Southern Oregon, which is awesome. I'm way more of a big city person myself, but I can see my friends like, oh, so and so's in Hawaii living it up,
Sure.
and so's in this place living it up, and so's here having a great time. And turns out some of them are having a great time, but a lot of them are not, and they're all
Sure.
dealing with their own stuff, and it's all a facade, you know.
Mm.
And so I think, yeah, there's just so much hurt going around mixed with unauthenticity. Is that a word?
Yeah.
I think it is.
Inauthentic, yeah.
Yeah, unauthentic,
Mhm.
and it's just the state of the world is crazy right now, man. So, yeah.
Yeah, mental health challenges, it's a debatable, but I would argue that it trends directly with the rise of the iPhone. The iPhone came in about 2008, and about a year later, we saw the statistics shoot up with anxiety and depression and suicidal rates. And so those numbers have continued to climb. And Jean Twenge, a book I'm going to recommend, it's my book, one of my rare books here. She records it well and points to it. And there's been some other documentaries on like Netflix or on YouTube you can find about the rise of like social media and how it's impacting a generation. And they can almost linchpin like the rise of mental health crisis to the cell phone, to the smartphone, and the amount of time spent. And now brain science would probably suggest that the less time you spend on your smartphone, the less anxious, the less depressed, the less you
Yeah.
are. Not always. I'm not saying that's for everybody, but that's a pretty common factor is the smartphone, which we think it's a great tool and it saved us from a lot of heartache and problems and it makes things easier, but is it also killing our kids? And that's the scary thing I think of for
Yeah.
my kids and for Gen Z is this thing that we love so much, the thing that's actually damaging us the worst. I don't know.
Yeah.
No, that's good. And even as I have a 1-year-old, like trying to figure out, and I realize that sometimes she's looking at it, and I think she looks at it because she sees mom and dad looking at it all the
Sure.
time, right? Like, so that's definitely like some food for thought. But all right, well, yeah, a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, but luckily we know the answer, and the answer is Jesus. But it's a really hard path still in a journey. So I do kind of want to shift gears and just. Yeah, what the Gen Z path to Jesus has looked like. Heck, even a word. Actually, no. Before I put the cart before the horse, I just want to kind of have you lay us the foundation of statistically, what has Gen Z's relationship to the church look like?
Right. Yeah. Pretty low attendance is a pretty common stat. I would say they're the least religious, like I kind of already said, least religious generation, least church generation for sure. Some of it goes to a lack of trust and authority, and
Yeah,
churches have
100%.
pastors or people that they would give authority to, right? So Gen Z is like, it's taboo to have authority in your life.
Yeah.
Because I'm my own authority. I have Google.
Yeah.
So why do I need a pastor or a church to disciple me when Google has already discipled me, kind
already
of thing?
have
So
one,
like, why do
yeah.
I need the church when I
Yeah.
can get all this information? And why go listen to a really boring talk? No offense to the public speakers or pastors in the world, but like, why go listen to this guy on stage who's not that great when I can go listen to the best, epic, most funniest videos on YouTube for hours on end? Like, that's way more fun.
Yeah.
So church in it, like the organization of a Sunday morning church, doesn't have a ton of draw for Gen Z because it's just not where they're at in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah, and I mean, I think the word that came to mind was like a response to conviction, right? So you're
Yeah.
sitting in church, dude's saying something, and it just strikes you, right? Like they're almost calling you out. Like, this dude doesn't know me. Like,
Yeah.
what the heck? But so as I'm doing the math, it's pretty interesting. And correct me if I'm wrong. Gen Z's right now in the church, you're either in the youth ministry or you're a young adult. You could be the pastor of a church. You could be in the worship. You could be on the leadership team. That's kind of where our Gen Z's in the church would be right now. Probably the only place they're not is the elder board, right? Like,
Sure.
so just a span of roles that a Gen Z could be. So this is another podcast all on its own, but this idea of deconstruction, is that more of a Gen Z kind of vehicle, or would it be millennials, or just, I mean, it's, again, Gen Z, if you're, or deconstruction, that idea of like, right, actually, I believe we just had a blog. Didn't we just have a blog? Maybe not yet. About deconstruction. We're going to edit that out. Yeah, this idea of like maybe tearing down the religion, trying to find that authenticness,
Sure.
right? And you're either going to find Jesus or nothing, right?
Right, sure.
So, yeah, I don't know if we're seeing that more in the Gen Z or not, or if they're just not giving church a chance. Or
I don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
if you see that more with your peers, or you kind of said you have friends who've kind of gone that direction a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gen Z is the most self-entitled
Yeah,
generation.
sure, that's a
and
good
so
point.
like there's a constant challenge to authority, like you mentioned, and like if a kid was about to cross the road and the parent said, "Why?" like don't cross the road, and the kid was like, "Why?" Like he's trying to save you from
Yeah.
getting hit by a bus, but there's a constant like we want to know the answer to everything. We have to
Sure.
know like what makes you qualified to tell me like how to live my life? What makes you qualified to tell me this isn't right? You know, and so yeah, I definitely think that's a huge part of it for sure.
So I want to get to this idea of what, how can the church, or what does the church do for Gen Z?
The specific church, or just in general, like
Let's
Big
do
C Church? Well, I think we already know the answer of what Big C Church
Yeah.
offers Gen Z. It offers belonging.
Yeah.
And we see that a lot already in some of our student ministries. We're seeing kids come who aren't too familiar with church background, but they like this youth group kind of feel, this place of like, I can belong here.
Yeah,
and there's
yeah.
friendly people. And there's adults here who seem to like believe in me and are trying to get to know my name and what I like to do. And there's like authentic relationships happening. And that's something that the Christian church, when following the way of Jesus, it offers something the world cannot offer. The world and YouTube and social media cannot offer authentic community. And that's something we can offer. That's why we're big on life groups here at River Valley, because there's authentic community
Yeah.
we hold as like that is what we do. And so that's something that I think the church at large offers that Gen Z is not going to get anywhere else.
Yeah,
That's good.
for sure.
And anything else to add to that? Big C Church, just
I think you summed it up, bro.
yeah, belonging. That kind of seems to be the word of
100%.
Gen Z, right? Like
100%.
what they desire, what
Oh,
they
sure.
Yeah. Yeah, well, let's get local opportunities that River Valley offers. I mean, you referenced a few of them, right? But
Well, we have Gen Zers on our worship team. Mr.
Yeah.
Jummerman
Heyo.
here. Recording artist, by the way, right? I mean,
Yeah,
when's
we
the
got-
EP drop, my guy?
It's coming soon. We're working hard.
See,
so
Gen Z entrepreneurial. We got our own. He's over here making his own music. I mean, so
Yeah.
So I mean, I think one thing that River Valley, we as a church, believe in is Gen Z is not like the church of the future only. They're the church today as well. They
Yeah,
participate
yeah.
in the church life embodied today now. So. We do have the traditional things like a Wednesday night program for high school, a Tuesday night program for the middle school. We have Sunday morning program for the littles. We offer different trips and retreats and camps and places to belong. But more than anything, I think we do really well, better than I would say most churches I've interacted with, is we offer loving, caring adults, we call them small group leaders, staff that are going to walk alongside of students. And we
That's awesome.
empower our volunteer staff to be the youth pastors of the kids that come in. So the 10th grade girls, they have they might call these two ladies their youth pastors. They're two ladies who lead this group. They're adults who walk alongside those girls, right? We have two leaders for every age group from 6th through 12th grade. Something that's pretty special that I don't think a lot of churches can offer, but because of the size of our church and the depth of our church, we get to offer
Super
loving
cool.
adults with community. And so I think that's something that's pretty special that Gen Z, I think, craves, and we're seeing them respond back like, yeah, I think I do want someone in my life who is a mentor type figure in my life who will listen to my story, will care about me,
Yeah.
and I think that's important.
Yeah, I forget how lucky we are at River Valley when I think of our number of youth volunteers alone. 30
Yeah.
to 40, right?
Oh, yeah, easily.
And,
Oh, my
And you
goodness.
go interact with, because we have those 2 small group leaders for every gender, every grade, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's 8 small groups in high school, 6 in middle school. Each one, hopefully, 2 to 3 leaders.
Yep.
And you'll go talk to other youth pastors, and they're like, yeah, me and my team, which is me and my wife. And we're like, wow, we have a team of 30 to 40.
Right. We have
Who-
a small army.
Who love these kids, who aren't there because they have to be. It's not court ordered, right? They're
Right.
there because they want to be. Yeah, that's been good. And then one thing, I've grown up in River Valley, but I've definitely heard experiences. I've heard people on our team say that the multi-generational respect and love here at River Valley is really alive, right? We have
Yeah.
older generations on our staff, and we have younger generations on our staff, and the respect is there across the board for each other. And I just think that's so healthy, right? Like there's a
Yeah,
lot
absolutely.
of wisdom in the older generations, and our younger people are willing to listen. Our younger people also don't mind maybe giving a little challenge, and our older generations will listen. And a lot of experiences to be had and shared.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of like that belonging Like, it's one thing to belong amongst all your peers, which is really hard, but then to belong as a bigger family, which is
Body
something
of
I just-
Christ, yeah.
yeah, as the body of Christ, as we are instructed to do. Is it perfect? No, we're not at all. But it's there. The attempt is there. We realize the purpose of
Yeah.
it. Yeah, if you go into any of our leadership meetings, right, there is a widespread like age span, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Trying to figure out how to use the word dearth again. I was like, that's not the right spot. I got to figure out what that word means. Yeah. So just again, that family, that belonging, it is there. It is here, and it's been really cool to be a part of.
We love
Yeah.
Gen Z.
Gen Z, baby.
Well, yeah. No, I mean they're. Yeah, it's just like it's if we want the church in Grand Pass to be here in 50 years, right? Like it can't end with us. And we love Gen Z, and I'm sure we'll love this Gen Alpha group. We'll
We need a better name still.
yeah,
I like
why
them being
Gen
Alpha.
Like, so are we just gonna go Alpha?
Because
Beta?
yeah, exactly. So it's just
Yeah,
Greek
Gen
alphabet.
Beta is not going to grow up at any self.
Oh
What are we working?
Generation Meta.
no! Oh, that might be them. Yeah.
Oh,
You might have just made something there.
oh, hey.
Yeah, no, we'll see. But all right. Well, I think we're landing the plane here. So I just want to throw two more things at you. A, any final thoughts? B, resources that you want our listeners.
I think
to...
I've given all my thoughts. Resources that I would recommend. I already talked about iGen from Gene Twenge, Generation Z Unfiltered by Tim Elmore, Growing Young by Kara Powell, Brad Griffin. Yeah, got a few books sitting here if you're watching the YouTube. But Carey Nieuwhof podcast does a lot of Gen Z stuff. If you're interested in like kind of just listening to a podcast, long form talk. Theology in the Raw is more. Preston Sprinkle does a lot of things with Gen Z. He'll bring in Gen Z, and he's trying to be more cutting edge with where Gen Z's at with social justice stuff or ministry and philosophy and why they do what they do. So recommend those podcasts. But yeah, of course, I think the cool thing about River Valley, I mean, to those of you watching, listening, is the staff here, we're available. So if you ever have questions about your kids, your grandkids, about what you're seeing, about if you ever need helps or resources, please come talk to us. We'd love to help resource you and point you in the right direction or encourage you whatever way we can. So those are some resources I think of. But to our Gen Zer, last thoughts?
Hey, I think I'm all good on my thoughts. So
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
ditto on the resources. Right?
yeah. Hey.
Cool. Yeah, and just to echo Joe, resources if you have grandkids, kids, you're looking to plug them in. We got Midway Tuesday night, 6:30 to 8 at the playground at the church. The next night, Wednesday, 6:30, 8:30, D Street door there by the church for high schoolers. So
You got
we're
it.
there. There's also young adults that Joe shepherds as well. So yeah, opportunities, that's for sure. So listeners, if you are still with us, we appreciate you listening. Again, we're going to take the rest of the year off. We are excited to pick back up in some form next year. So we hope that you've appreciated everything. Hope you've appreciated this podcast. If you have any questions, you know the email to reach out to. That is diggingdeeper@rivervalleycc.org. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thanks,
Listeners,
Tim.
Phil.
thank you. Catch you next
Yes.
time.